I'm not really sure how to start this video. I wouldn't call myself a hardcore Ratchet and Clank fan. In fact, my introduction to the series was through Ratchet and Clank Size Matters, and if that wasn't bad enough, I've only experienced Ratchet and Clank through the PS3 Future Trilogy as well as the PSP titles. So, with Ratchet and Clank, I wouldn't really call myself the expert with anything about it. I still remember when A Crack in Time was about to come out in 2009, and I was on the edge of my seat. I didn't own a PS3 considering it was relatively expensive back then, but I still recall waiting for October 27th, 2009 in anticipation. When I finally got my hands on it for my 13th birthday, I admittedly wasn't able to finish it, not even beat it. Although I do have fond memories of sneaking downstairs in the middle of the night and playing up to 4 o'clock in the morning. Hey, when you're spending middle school years being bullied and picked on, you need something to alleviate yourself with. How time has passed. So in one sense, this is almost like being able to play the game with fresh eyes. Also, I kind of felt like this was the most sensible follow-up to my otherwise horrendous Tools of Destruction review. After making some improvements to my presentation and whatnot, hopefully this is an at least halfway decent review of A Crack in Time. Hopefully. So without further ado,
and we shall see if Ratchet and Clank Future A Crack in Time has aged well past the 2009 era. Cue the intro!
So what came out during 2009? Well, just to name a few, you had Uncharted 2 Among Thieves, Modern Warfare 2, Infamous. Yeah, the gaming industry was changing, and I think many gamers were longing for something that was more mature. Ratchet and Clank, to my knowledge, was mature in its humor. Yeah, it was generally the humor, and then some. But I guess in response to this, maybe Insomniac Games wanted to make the Future Trilogy more cinematic. Give it a grandeur and epic story. Basically, it was up to A Crack in Time to cap off what Insomniac started with Tools of Destruction. Maybe it was because there was so much of an infatuation with FPSs that A Crack in Time, while still positive, did not score as high in comparison with Modern Warfare 2. And while it did win some Game of the Year awards, like the 6th Best Game of the Year in 2009 from IGN, didn't get the same reception as, say, Uncharted 2.
Sad.
As far as I'm concerned, the development for A Crack in Time went very smoothly. There was the My Blaster Runs Hot competition, and the weapon they chose contentiously wasn't even that creative. But the thing that always gets me is how they initially wanted to title this game Clock Blockers, which according to my research is a movie about 3 roommates trying to live together in an apartment and can't tell when each of them are supposed to show up in the room. And then there's a lot of other definitions for clock blockers. I don't know. When you have other titles like Up Your Arsenal and Going Commando, I guess it isn't too surprising, but it still is kind of interesting how Sony had them switch it to A Crack in Time. I guess maybe Clock Blockers sounds a little too goofy for the serious tone this game is going for. Again, I don't know. So I feel the most reasonable way to start with this review is through the story. The overarching narrative is what provides the backbone to the gameplay. Now, I know that's not always the case with all games, but the story is important, arguably. The game leaves off where Christopher Booty ended, where Dr. Nefarious is approaching an unconscious Clank. Even though he initially promised he would fix Clank, what he really longed for was the location of the Great Clock. The Zoni would try to protest, but before they could do anything, Dr. Nefarious unleashes the hypersonic brainwave scrambler. Already this hooks me in with Dr. Nefarious. I know he was in previous games, but he really shows off his charisma. He comes across as such a calculating villain, like when he wants Clank to come to the Great Clock in order to figure out how to use it. And he always has an intimidating characteristic of being so driven towards his goal. Even Lord of Vorsalon dreads him. Okay, so his ultimate mastermind plan to have all the villains win wasn't the best in terms of being thought out, but he really is a villain that gives the game a new kind of comedic energy per se. On the other hand, you have Ratchet and Clank, who are both going through dual stories at once. Clank learns that he needs to become the new caretaker for the Great Clock, and the game centers on him learning more and more about his father, Orvis. On the other hand, Ratchet runs into Alistair Azimuth, a rebel who happens to be another Lombax from the time of Ratchet's father, and he joins him in his quest to correct his mistakes of misguiding the other Lombaxes into the current exile they reside in. I guess this is a good time to talk about the Chosen One arc A Crack in Time introduces. Todd had a Chosen One arc with Ratchet supposedly being the last of the Lombaxes. So now Clank also has an arc of being the Chosen One as the Keeper of the Great Clock. I just think the Chosen One archetype is generic, but for the most part they do a lot of good things with it, such as showing how their respective new roles create a strain in the duo's relationship. I mean, in Tools of Destruction, they also had a strange relationship, but what were they contending about? There was the whole argument over the existence with the Zoni, and that was interesting to say the least. However, in A Crack in Time, the story centers on how their respective roles clash with their personal relationship. Ratchet is forced to leave Clank behind because of Clank's newfound responsibility as the caretaker of the clock. At the same time, Alistair Azimuth desires to bring back all the Lombaxes from their exiled location using the Great Clock. However, as Clank attempts to explain, the Great Clock was never meant to be used for such manipulation. It kind of creates a bit more of a dilemma in the overall story. It doesn't just feel like Ratchet and Clank are going on an epic quest to save the galaxy. Their personal lives are also at stake. The characterization is really strong with Ratchet and Clank Future A Crack in Time. Ratchet and Clank remain their typical selves, but there's a certain amount of weight that highlights their personalities. Clank continues to be the rational one, but now he serves as a voice of reason to prevent Ratchet and Azimuth from misusing the clock. In the past, he always did serve as a voice of reason, but here, it almost feels like he is the conscience to Ratchet, warning him how what he wants to do is a huge risk. By the way, I know Clank was born from a robot factory in the first game, so I guess this game retcons Clank's origin. Ratchet continues to be the adventurous and daring one, but it isn't to the point that he is egotistical. He has a sense of loyalty to go after his friend. He has a sense of curiosity with Azimuth as well as the unknown origins of his family. It seems to emphasize that despite Ratchet's adventurous attitude and glowing ego, he is also very small and insignificant in the universe, just like everyone else. Azimuth, on the other hand, is probably one of the deepest characters I've ever seen in a video game. He shows himself to be very capable of a lot, convincing the head of Pollux Industries to give away the Obsidian Eye, training Ratchet how to use hover boots, but in the end he is just a broken man, or Lombax, that wants to reverse the tragic events he was responsible for that sent his and Ratchet's race in another dimension. What happens to him is truly heartbreaking, and he feels like the only character that goes through an explicit arc. Say what you want about this guy. I know some people don't like him, but for me, he is one of the best characters in the game. And then, besides the main cast, you have the side characters like Sigmund, Lawrence, and Quark. Sigmund was just one of the characters that came across as your clumsy sidekick, but he was a likable version of that archetype. Lawrence is again like the evil villain's incompetent sidekick, but he's also charming in his own way. And Quark is just Quark.
While the story and characterization are very important, what about the gameplay? After all, the gameplay is also very major to the quality of the game.
Ah yes, the gameplay. The most important aspect of a game. Or is it? I don't know, who cares? So if you've ever played any other Ratchet and Clank game, I can safely say that this is more of the same. On the surface, that is. You see, A Crack in Time has the same run-and-gun kind of mix with platforming that all the other Ratchet and Clank games have. And that's fine. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. However, there are a couple new additions that A Crack in Time adds to the overall premise. For instance, the hover boots, which Azimuth gifts to you from Ratchet's father. You can pull these out whenever you want with a simple click of the directional button. Ratchet has the ability to accelerate with these and hop off ramps. Very efficient, especially when you are trying to reach faraway areas. Also, you can hover over to areas, so you don't need Clank to help you to get over to distant lands.
Nice.
The game features new weapons in the arsenal. I found the Sonic Eruptor to be particularly useful, especially for crowd control, considering that if you fire it at just the right time, it unleashes a belch that rips through large amounts of enemies. It is also a very skill-based weapon. Firing it when the meter is full is the only way to use it properly. Tesla spikes are another addition that I found useful, especially with how they would create tethers of electricity when placed in proximity with one another. If you found yourself overwhelmed with a multitude of enemies on the screen, then this was the excellent weapon to go for. The game also goes as far as to incentivize you for using Groovatrons and Mr. Zircons. Previously, they had just been devices that didn't upgrade, but now they have a level up bar as any of the other weapons. Speaking of upgrades, now A Crack in Time no longer uses the Raritanium level up system of Tools of Destruction, which makes leveling up with experience more rewarding. Although, I do wish there were differences between a V2 Constructo Bomb Glove and a V3 one. The weapons only fundamentally change with the V5, and as you level them up, there are some differences with aspects like damage and radius, but I wish there had been different effects with each level up. Just a nitpick, though. Besides Ratchet, there's also Clank's gameplay, which is related to, of all things, time, since he is now the keeper of the Great Clock. So as timekeeper, Clank can create multiple recordings of himself doing activities. These are used to solve puzzles involving opening doors, and they start out basic and become more complex. You don't have to do these considering you have the option to skip them. However, you do get a boatload of bolts for accomplishing them. This was one of their main selling points for A Crack in Time. Overall, the new Clank gameplay is very creative and is a great departure from his usual gameplay of giving commands to sentient creatures in the other games. The other new feature they added was Clank's ability to stabilize time anomalies. These minigames mainly involve you fixing the time anomalies in different planets represented by these laser-looking beams scattered across the atmosphere. One of the cool aspects about these minigames is that once you solve them, you can return to the respective planet as Ratchet and find a gold bolt. It incentivizes the player to return to previous planets. But what I really want to talk about is the whole space traversal system. Now, I heard that Insomniac really wanted to make a sandbox game out of A Crack in Time, or at least thought about it. I think they implemented some elements onto here. So for instance, there's the minimap which tells you different points of destination. Many of the locals will make you accomplish certain tasks for them, like taking them over to another planet. You can land on top of little mini planets, or maybe they're called the dwarf planets, and accomplish a Mario Galaxy style platforming section in order to find a Sony or a gold bolt. I spent hours planet hopping all over space, trying to accomplish whatever I could. Insomniac added so much variety with this feature. If you collect enough Zoni, your ship will get an upgrade, like new missiles that ricochet off of enemies, booster engines, and a laser. Oh, and speaking of collectibles, there are also Constructo mods. The Constructo mods can be put onto blasters, grenades, and shotguns, and can sometimes add a bit of a kick, like changing the thrusters to rapid fire, or giving the bomb glove a bigger radius. My favorite was being able to change the Constructo pistol into a laser weapon with pyrokinetic features. Pew 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 pew. My only complaint is why not give a mod to the other weapons too? As for the graphics and sound design, there's not really much to say if you ask me. If there is one thing that A Crack in Time does nail, it is the atmosphere. The Bernelius sector is filled with ships flying throughout the recesses of space. Ice crystals hover over the planets as they platform across them. The same can be said for planets like Xanathar. The cold, icy landscape of the prison camps create a feeling of isolation. Fitting considering the fate of the Fongoids. However, the mood changes with the colorful, lush jungle atmosphere that the past Fongoid village once was. The deceptive peacefulness is interrupted by the interior of Dr. Nefarious' tower being filled with troops trying to kill you. Of course, the atmosphere is helped by the musical score of Brian Salcho. While there are no memorable pieces within the game, he still manages to create fitting tunes for whatever is happening in the game. He does seem to abandon the techno-style soundtrack that David Bergeau uses in favor for a more orchestral one. The voice talent of James Arnold Taylor, David Kay, Arnold Sherman all return as their roles as Ratchet, Clank, and Nefarious. The voice talent in general is really good. Joey D'Aria did a superb job on Alistair Azimuth. He gave the emotional weight that Azimuth needed in order to be portrayed as a tragic figure. So the game generally falls apart towards the third act of the game. You disguise yourself as Dr. Nefarious to break into his station, and I must say that I really love commanding the bots to be exterminated or summoning Lawrence. Although, here's where the joyride ends. Dr. Nefarious catches you snooping around and tries to announce his plan, despite the fact that Ratchet does everything in his power to convince him not to use the Great Clock. Question: why is Ratchet trying to reason with this evil scientist? The game seems to treat this as if Nefarious can be reasoned to do something good or at least neutral, but dude, he has the last name of Nefarious. That's like me trying to convince Hitler not to kill the Jews because it would lead to a mass genocide. And of course, there's his evil plan to make every protagonist fail, which is just generic and has no personal depth as to why he would want to do something like that, except that he's evil. So he flings Ratchet and Clank into the depths of space where they are rescued by the Zoni. They end up on planet Morklon. An inhabitant strikes a deal with him to rebuild an Agorian vessel, and he tells the story of how they lost an ancient war against them. The duo use a time portal to go back 100 years ago where they participate in the war, and it's just rushed. What's the point of all this? It seemingly doesn't add into anything and somewhat inconsequential, except that Ratchet and Clank are praised as heroes in the present for winning the war. All this just to earn an Agorian vessel to get back to Nefarious' ship to face him. And then let me emphasize, you have to fight 2 Hydra tanks. I repeat, 2. I died countless times because it wasn't clear to me where the second Hydra would detect me, so there were times when I was fighting one while trying to dodge the attacks of the second one. All the while, Agorians around you are trying to shoot me. But it all comes together in the end. You reach Dr. Nefarious' ship and fight him. Then, Ratchet, Clank, and Azimuth reunite at the Great Clock's steps. Ratchet basically says, Clank, you're the one in the right, and let's go of chasing after the Lombaxes and retracing his family. Enraged, Azimuth kills Ratchet. That's right, he fucking kills him.
What the hell? Come on, what are you, an idiot?
Jesus, Insomniac actually went there, but it's no big deal, for Clank winds the clock 6 minutes before in order to bring him back. After we have a boss fight with him, Ratchet corrects him with the clock was never meant to be a time machine. Azimuth, seeing that he must undo his mistakes, sacrifices himself in order to prevent there from being a fracture in the space-time continuum. I suppose this is a good time to talk about the themes in the story. There is the main theme of letting go of the past and moving on. Clank sort of represents moving on from the past, while Azimuth represents as someone who clings onto it. Not only does Clank have to move on from being with Ratchet, he also has to move on from losing his father. He even tries to get Ratchet to go back to the past to rescue Orvis from Nefarious. However, Ratchet gets there too late and his father gets lost for good. In many ways, this is similar to Ratchet's grievance of losing his family. Azimuth clings onto the past. He represents the longing that Ratchet has to see his family again, whereas Clank represents the part of his conscience telling him to move on. After all, the game ends with Ratchet and Clank blasting off into the unknown, leaving thousands of fanfic writers to continue the story in their imagination. No, those never happened. In many ways, this scene represents Ratchet and Clank moving on from their respective grievances. Clank as the caretaker after his father Orvis, and Ratchet looking for his race to see better things. Well, that was my review of Ratchet and Clank Future: A Crack in Time. I hope you all enjoyed it. Don't forget to leave a like or subscribe if you want. Or you could leave a dislike if you didn't like it. And I'll, guess nothing much to say here, but I'll rip you guys a new one.